week before Easter. Now I want to ask you to do something for me. I want you to take your bulletins, look at the front. It's not your common Palm Sunday bulletin cover. Who knows what this is? What's that? It's the Mount of Olives. It looks like a bunch of tombs, doesn't it? Well, that's what it is. These tombs are 3,000 and 4,000 years old, some of them. And when Jesus left Bethany, this is what he walked through, going down the Mount of Olives through the Garden of Gethsemane and into Jerusalem. And I will, I'm going to briefly mention some of that today, but next year on Palm Sunday, I will give you even more history about this. And the people who go to Israel with me or who have been to Israel will be nodding along with what I say next year. But today we are looking at Jesus' procession into Jerusalem. We're going to read from John chapter 12. We're going to read verses 12 through 19. The next day, the great crowd that had come to the festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, "Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on the donkey's colt." His disciples didn't understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered these things had been written of him and had been done to him. So the crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to testify. It was also because they heard that he had performed these signs that the crowd went to meet him. The Pharisees then said to one another, "You see, you can do nothing. Look, the world has gone after him." So let's pray. Holy God, thank you for this reading of your holy word. God, open this scripture to us today that we would understand it more fully than we have before. Open our hearts and our minds that we would hear from you, that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts would be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. So today represents the beginning of the final week of Jesus walking among us before the crucifixion and resurrection. Jesus has been in Bethany. He's been with his resurrected friend Lazarus and Lazarus' sister Mary and Martha. And the time had come for him to travel to the temple to be there for the week of festivities leading up to the Passover. It was a short walk down a hill through a cemetery that would become one of the most famous parades in all of history. Now, at the time, Jewish faith had 3 pilgrimages, if you would call it that, every year. All able adult males would bring their family to Jerusalem, to the temple, for Sukkot, for Shabbat, and for the Passover. And the Passover was by far the most important. When Jesus entered Jerusalem for the Passover, the population would have grown tenfold. A city that was usually about 200,000 would suddenly be 2.5 million people. That's why Jesus wasn't staying in Jerusalem, just like he was when he was a baby. There was no room in the inn. There were no rooms in the inns in Jerusalem, in the hotels, the hostels, anywhere. So he was staying with his friends about 2 miles away. The Passover was the remembrance of what the Israelite people went through during their time in Egypt as slaves. We all remember the 10 Commandments story, Charleston Heston, he is Moses, there will never be another, and we remember the plagues, the locusts, my favorite was the frogs, you had fire and ice from the sky, you had water turning to blood, but the final plague was the plague of the angel of death coming through. And if you didn't follow the strict set of requirements, of rules, of guidelines, then your firstborn child, firstborn male in every household, including animals, would die. So the people had to take a lamb, slaughter the lamb, They had to take the blood from the slaughtered lamb, paint it on the doorposts and the lintel of their homes, and then they would roast the lamb with bitter herbs, cook it quickly, and then they would eat bread that hasn't had a chance to rise because they were moving too quickly. So lamb, bitter herbs, and unleavened bread. And this Passover celebration that continues today was the celebration of the release from bondage of the Israelite people. They had been kept in bondage for generations, and they had been freed. And yet, as Jesus prepared to celebrate this Passover, hundreds of years after the first Passover, Jesus is gathering with his friends, and they're oppressed. They are under the oppression of the Roman Empire. They're celebrating freedom while they are no longer free. And they were looking for a king who would conquer the Romans, just like the Maccabees had conquered the Greeks, the Greek Empire. You know, Alexander the Great. The Greek Empire had been conquered about 200 years before by the Maccabees and driven out of Jerusalem. And they had restored Israeli rule on the throne. And they were looking for someone that could do that again. And before Jesus entered Jerusalem from the east, they would see Herod's parade coming in from the north. Now, if you don't remember Herod, he was kind of the political leader of the Jewish people in that region, and he came in with all the pomp and circumstance of a political leader with his band of followers following him. This wasn't your ordinary political parade. See, Herod was the same guy that had John the Baptist beheaded because his daughter-in-law or his stepdaughter danced naked before his court, and he said he'd give her anything she wanted, and she asked for Herod's head on a platter. And so he gave her that. This is a guy that he was known to have jaguars and leopards as pets roaming around in his court. This was a weird guy. You know, and this parade was more like a psychedelic zoo than some kind of a political parade we would think of today. I cannot imagine the band of merriment that went behind him as he entered on the backs of the people carrying his litter. And then coming from the west, we have Pilate. He usually stayed at Caesarea Maritima. If you've ever been to Caesarea Maritima, you'll understand why. It's on the Mediterranean Sea. It's a beautiful place. And he would usually stay there because he really didn't like the Jewish people, but he tolerated them because that's where he had been sent to do his job. But with 2.5 million people coming into Jerusalem, he had to go in with a platoon of soldiers, so to speak, to try to keep the peace. So Pilate would come in with military power and might. He would come in riding on a white stallion with his armor glistening, and all of the soldiers with their glistening armor and their red undergarments showing. And they would be carrying their swords and their spears. If you think of today's time, you might think of the movies you've seen and the video footage you've seen of the Nazis coming into town, or the communist Russian parades with their nuclear missiles rolling down the street, or in most common today, the North Koreans and their military parades, an attempt to show the power and might that they possess. These rulers came in with military and political power. These parades represented everything the people of Israel wanted for themselves without having it shoved down their throat by the Romans. They wanted their own political leaders. They wanted their own political and military power, but instead they had an occupying force of Rome. So there's millions of people in Jerusalem this day. They've seen Pilate come into town. They've seen Herod come into town. And the word has spread about this man that just a couple of weeks before raised someone from the dead. Now, that was no big deal. I mean, there were other miracle workers that had raised people from the dead, but this guy raised someone from the dead who had been dead 4 days. If you were fans of Princess Bride, you know he wasn't mostly dead; he was all dead. In Jerusalem, they had this little thing where if you were only 3 days dead, then your spirit was still hanging around, but it left after the 3rd day. Up to 3 days, you're only almost dead. But the 4th day, you're really dead. So when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, people heard. The news spread far and wide. And people wanted to see this man that could perform that kind of a miracle because maybe he could be the one. Some came knowing who he was, or at least who they thought he was. They'd maybe followed him for months, some maybe even a year. Others came because they had heard of this miracle and they were hoping to see him perform a miracle. Others came because it was just the biggest show in town. The tent circus went up, and that's where you go because you want to go see what's going on. He was the biggest show in town. Other people were gathering, so they went to gather. And everyone got caught up in the drama of what was going on, and they started waving palm branches out and laying their cloaks out and laying the palm branches down for Jesus to walk on, almost like a red carpet. And while Herod arrived on a litter on the backs of men, and Pilate came in on his white stallion of war, Jesus came in on a donkey, a beast of burden that represented peace. While Pilate arrives with power from Rome and Herod arrives with opulence and wealth, Jesus came in parading through a cemetery down a hill from Bethany, which literally means the house of the poor. Everything Jesus did that day is showing who he was and who he is. Jesus didn't come to bring war, he came to bring peace. Jesus brought a message of love, not hate. Jesus brought a message that said, pray for those who persecute you. Jesus brought a message where he wanted to bring peace to people, yet they wanted him to drive the Romans out. They wanted him to come in with war, but he had a different plan. They wanted Jesus to destroy the Romans, but Jesus wanted to use the Roman Empire to spread his message. A friend of mine once said, Jesus' method turned the most powerful enemy of Christians, the Romans, into the birthplace of Christianity. You see, Jesus had a vision that the world could not see. Jesus had a perspective no one could understand. And that day, as the lambs were being brought into the temple from the other side of town in preparation for the sacrifices of Passover, Jesus came in from another gate to be the very sacrificial lamb for you and I. Not the leader the people planned to follow, not where the people thought they wanted to go. It's important that we understand where we're going. Sometimes we need to know who we're following and where they're going. It's important to know where you're going. When I was young, I would play a game called Capture the Flag as a scout. How many of you have played Capture the Flag? Okay, a few of you raise your hands. You know what we're doing here. Our particular place was the hunting lease for our scoutmaster. So when it wasn't hunting season, we'd go up and we'd camp, and there was a pipeline through the middle, so it was cleared out, and then woods on both sides. And this was our field of play. So in the game, one team would have a flag. They would go hide their flag in their side of the woods. Then you had that open zone, that's the neutral zone. And then the other side of the woods was the other team, and they'd hide their flag. The goal is to guard your flag, but at the same time, sneak over and capture their flag. And you don't want to get caught by the enemy, because first of all, we were full contact. So no pads, full contact. If you're in the open neutral zone, you're going to get form tackled into the ground and drugged to the other side. You didn't want that to happen. Plus, you would be imprisoned, and the game was over for you, unless one of your teammates snuck in and captured you and brought you out of prison. But so We always played this game at night. And, nothing bad can happen when you've got 12, 14, 16-year-old boys running around in the dark at night, except Corey. Corey was new. He wasn't familiar with our field of play. He didn't know all the intricacies, but he was really fast, and he was really sneaky, and he was really good at this game. He'd never played it. He caught on quick, and he loved it. He had snuck into the enemy territory. He'd captured their flag, and he was trying to sneak out, but they saw him. And they started chasing him. Well, he wasn't going to let them catch him, so he took off running as fast as he could. There was enough moonlight where he could see the trees really well, but he couldn't see the barbed wire fence. How many of you have heard someone hit a barbed wire fence full speed? It's kind of a boing, and then you hear a thump as they hit the ground about 15 feet away. We saw what had happened. We all rushed to Corey to see if he was okay. And he had a stripe cut in his shirt here and here, and then a red stripe on his legs. He's laying on the ground moaning, but he still had the flag. It's important that you know where you're going. He didn't know the field of play. He didn't know where was a safe place to run like he was running. Sometimes we have to know where we're going. We can't just take off on our own. We need to know who to follow so they can show us the way. And as individuals, we need to ask ourselves, which Jesus are we following? Are we following a Jesus that tells us to go get healthy and wealthy and climb to the top so we can have all the power and prestige we can get? Or are we following a Jesus that shows us how to serve, how to give, how to live and die so that others may live? We need to know because it matters. And I'm not saying that being wealthy and healthy or anti-Christian at all. In fact, Jesus surrounded himself with wealthy people. How do you think he supported his ministry? But Jesus also surrounded himself with smelly fishermen, low-life tax collectors. Anybody feeling like the tax collectors are kind of low-life today as we get ready for tomorrow? He surrounded himself with war-loving zealots. And if Jesus wanted power and prestige, he would have surrounded himself with the Herodians and the Pharisees. Instead, Jesus called this diverse group to be his disciples. And here we are, 2,000 years later, and we're not much different. Back then it was a band of misfits, criminals, zealots, traders, fishermen, laborers, bankers, that all came together to follow Jesus, this man who was God in the flesh. And today, here we are, a band of misfits. Criminals, zealots, bankers, laborers, fishermen, mothers, daughters, fathers, sons, young, old. The one thing we have in common is we follow Jesus, a man who just happened to be God in the flesh. We're a group of followers who go out to tell others the story of what Jesus has done. We seek to make new disciples of Jesus, helping them to know, love, and serve him. So what Jesus are you following as we walk through Palm Sunday toward Easter? What difference will Easter make in your life? We have a choice. Each of us can be the people of Palm Sunday who waved palm branches and cried Hosanna on Sunday and waved fists and yelled crucify on Friday. Or we can be people of the cross and beyond, celebrating the life of Christ. Who do you choose? Who do you choose to be? Let's pray.